What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Steelers Breakdown Podcast. Nick Farabaugh here. Let's talk a little bit today about wide receiver room. Let's talk about the rest of the room. Since Ayuk is out of the picture, the Steelers did officially make signings of Brandon Johnson and Ben Skowronek official today. And so there is some veteran help that is coming to the Steelers, even if neither of these guys are needle movers. But since this is what the room has, let's break this down. And if they are going to overperform expectations right now, after everyone, including myself, is quite low on this room, let's talk about the paths to it, who could do it, and where each guy on this roster does excel and where they could maybe accentuate those strengths. So first of all, obviously George Pickens. I know he's obviously good and he's obviously the top wide receiver on this team, but first of all, wrap him in bubble wrap because if he gets injured, I think they're in a lot of trouble. But he's also got a mission to prove that he's a true one. I think we know he's a true two because you saw what he did last year. And honestly, I'm optimistic that he's going to prove that he's a one because last year he was very productive without Deontay Johnson. And so theoretically, you could easily see that coming. But it's really going to come down to how much he's improved his routes, his intermediate gameplay. Can he be more than a guy that runs go balls, 50% of the time? I think he can be. And so the Steelers are now going to have to see that. And that's going to be very important for them if they want to see him take that next leap. And then more importantly than that, than not just taking that leap, but also making sure that this is a guy, that takes a step forward with his maturity, that takes a step forward with his overall preparation week in, week out. He's a guy that works very hard. And he's looked like he's put his head down this season. I think he could be in for a big season. So I personally am fairly optimistic that they are going to find out George Pickens is at least a fringe one. I really think that. I think he's ready to take a leap. And so I know people have questions about him being a legit one. I watch his tape. I watch him in practice. I do very much think that he could be that. So we'll see where that goes. I think the rest of the room is where we get into real questions. So Van Jefferson, Calvin Austin the third, Roman Wilson, Scotty Miller. Let's talk about these four first because they are on the active roster right now, and so you know what you have. First of all, I just think there's an issue with gunner play on these four. Skowronek even is when we get to him, we'll talk about how his special teams ability is going to be a boost. But Miller's probably going to be the starting gunner opposite of Darius Rush. So that's going to be one of his utilities. For Calvin Austin, he will be the punt returner. So that'll be his additional utility on the team. Van Jefferson. Um, I am so here's my thing with Van Jefferson, because I have kind of talked down on him a lot, including yesterday. He's had a really good summer. He really has. He's had a much better summer than I thought he would have. He's looked good, even in games, even in the preseason games. You go back and watch the tape, and he's open far more than you would think. I'm just not. I don't think he's a two. If he just bumped down and was the three, I think he can legitimately be a good wide receiver three. He was that in Los Angeles. Part of the reason he flamed out in LA outside of, some injuries that ended up stacking up for him, was the fact that he couldn't catch the ball consistently. I think that's going to be something really important. You could tolerate stuff like that, dropping the football, um, running backwards and stuff, the stuff that made Deontay Johnson really, really hard to kind of pinpoint. You could tolerate that because he was an expert route runner and got open, but you can't tolerate that as much with Van Jefferson when he's not this expert level route runner. He's a solid one. He's got a decent release package. He's got long speed, I think. Pretty underrated long speed, actually. He can get downfield and win deep. But it's going to be about, can he catch the ball consistently and be a chain mover on third down and zones and things like that. That's where they're going to need him. They're going to need him in those areas. And he's following that Antonio Brown routine, catching 300 passes after every practice. Good. He had I think the third highest drop rate in the NFL since 2021. So it needs to go down. Um, for him to be considered, in this two role. I think he's got upside. I do. I think, he had only 209 yards last year. I think he can definitely outperform that. It wouldn't be a surprise to me to see him get up around 500. Um, I'm just, I just don't think he's a two. I think he can be a fine three though. If he was a wide receiver three, I think I'd be feeling very comfortable about it. But again, I think he might be a little overexposed as a two, but he has his strengths. Specifically, if he can catch the football, he can become a useful chain mover for the team. I think that's where it'll really pop up. Then you kind of look at Calvin Austin III, who had just an awesome spring. I mean, there's no way to sugarcoat that. His spring was incredible. He was beating everybody. He was getting wide open. Then the summer came, and he was solid at camp, but he wasn't elite at camp. And then the preseason games, he had a decent first game, and then you turned on the second game and third game, and it was just okay. I mean, I don't really think there's any other way I can describe it other than just that. It was okay. I don't think it was great. I don't think it was, particularly otherworldly in any way. It was just okay. And it wasn't bad on either side either. And that's kind of what I just feel about Calvin Austin to a degree. It was just okay. And so he can be a speed guy. I think he's a speed guy that you can count on to maybe get some deep targets and here or there maybe catch, a curl or something underneath, but I just don't think he's a high usage player, which is why I think eventually the guy we're going to talk about next, Roman Wilson, is going to supplant him in the slot. Um, if you want to use Arthur Smith comps for Calvin Austin, he can be Khalif Raymond, who is a guy that got, three targets a game, mostly deep balls, and can try and get big plays there. Um, Roman Wilson can be a higher usage player. Now it's going to be how quickly can he get up to speed. He's a really willing blocker, which Arthur Smith, again, just really considers. He uses his receivers a lot in the run game. This is why he likes Van Jefferson. This is why he likes Calvin Austin. These guys, even if they're not great blockers, are willing and try their butts off. Roman Wilson does the same thing, but he can be a third down chain move for them, especially in the play action game. His speed horizontally to stretch defenses is going to be a big weapon for them. By the end of the year, barring another trade deadline trade, whatever happens, would not be surprised to see Roman Wilson acting as the two on this team. I just think, he's a really, really fast player, sideline to sideline, really dependable hands. I think he needs to sharpen up his route running and different things of that nature, which is why I'm a little skeptical he's going to play much outside this year, but out of condensed stats, stacks, things that let him get releases off the line of scrimmage and to win horizontally on over routes. That's where he's going to be a big boost. And so I can imagine, on third downs or coming off play actions, if the run game's going really well, you can really do a lot of things with him. He can catch a dig and take what would be a 15-yard game 80 yards. He's that fast. He has instant acceleration off the line of scrimmage. So he could be a really fun weapon. I think that is going to be one of the biggest differences the Steelers will have from the wide receiving core last year that Arthur Smith had in Atlanta. He didn't have the speed that the Steelers have. Just from the top down, I think all five of the guys that we're talking about on the active roster have speed to burn. And I think that's going to be different when you talk about the horizontal route tree that is going to be in this offense. There's a lot of vertical routes as well, but when you talk about the overs, the crossers, the drags, the digs, things like that, I think the fact that you're going to have speedy guys on the move and you can try and get them free releases is going to be part of the schematic plan with winning with a wide receiving core that's not going to be, as high level. Um, as most others. So I think Roman Wilson's going to factor into that. It's going to be, can he get up to speed quickly? And I think his role is very defined, very clear. If that happens, Scotty Miller, not really sure how much he's going to play. Can play inside, outside. I actually wouldn't mind going back to Calvin Austin. He can beat press coverage. I know he's small, but I wouldn't mind them experimenting with him more outside than in the slot. They haven't really done a ton of that this year, but he can beat press. So I wouldn't mind seeing that experiment a little bit, just because again the talent here is not overwhelming. So I'm all for experimenting with ways to get guys, into positions that are advantageous to their strengths. For Scotty Miller, I expect that gunner work to be the main bulk of his workload. He could be a deep threat, obviously, in the slot or outside, can be depth. So if you have an injury, he has experienced mostly a deep threat. That's where he kind of wins, especially when you talk about, separating on the route tree and the horizontal and vertical route tree off play action. I think is where he'll really find his groove in this offense, if he does. But then you go to the practice squad. So let's talk about these two new additions. Let's talk about Brandon Johnson and Ben Skowronek, because I do think um, it's important to talk about those guys. When you are considering where the Steelers are going with this room, because I feel like these two guys honestly have a chance to usurp some of the players that are on the roster right now. Um, and let's start with Brandon Johnson. So this guy, man, Brandon Johnson's interesting. 19 receptions a year ago for almost 300 yards and 4 touchdowns with Russell Wilson. He did most of his work across the middle of the field. Um, you look at the drag routes, the over routes, the post routes, similar things that he would probably run in this scheme. This is what he would do. And so I think he's interesting. He's got build up speed, not really instant acceleration right off the line of scrimmage, which I don't think is necessary for what he would do. He's a big body. He's about 6'2". He can block and he can win downfield. And so he's an interesting player because I think he has skills that are already needed in this offense. For example, the ad-libbing with Russell Wilson, he has built-in chemistry. That is a very useful tool to have. No matter what, that's a good thing to have if you are a wide receiver. And so I think that's going to be something that we can circle back to. When you look at Pittsburgh specifically and the fit with it, in the offense, I think you see him being that Z receiver. I think you see him being the complementary guy, and he can break some tackles and has some wiggle. He's not the fluidest route runner. He's not the greatest separator, but when you get him free and get him build up speed like Arthur Smith does, I think you could find guys he'll be open at times and he'll be able to create some plays. I think he is an interesting player, honestly. I mean, he has, in terms of stats last year, raw stats, the second most receiving yards in this room behind George Pickens. I think he is probably someone that you could see get more and more reps as the season goes on. Would not surprise me at all. For Skowronek, I think it's less about receiver production. There can be receiver production. He's kind of this weird hybrid fullback, H-back receiver type, that Sean McVay used very he was very versatile in the Sean McVay offense. And he can block his behind. There's no doubt about that. He's very much a direct Miles Boykin replacement. That's what he feels like. He feels like the follow-up to Miles Boykin and not fully replacing him and his skill set this offseason. He'll give you special team snaps. He's a very good special teamer. He can run block very well. And if you get it to him in space, he's got good hands. And so that's really, the baseline with Skowronek. Again, I think all things considered, Johnson and Skowronek are pretty solid practice squad additions. They're just not needle movers. Would I have rather had Noah Brown and Tim Patrick? Probably. And then you look back at, missed opportunities throughout the entire cycle, and you wish that you had signed somebody there, because then these additions would have been upside to the depth, which I think would have been nice. But now, instead of, being, oh, maybe these guys can be upside to be the wide receiver 4, maybe even wide receiver 3, now they are they going to be two wide receiver 2? How is this going to work out? And so that's really the issue here. If everybody was just bumped down one, I think the Steelers would be perfectly fine with what they had. But they're going to be hedging a lot of, they don't have any hedge. They don't have any ability to hedge bet in this room. Van Jefferson has to be really good. They would like to get stuff out of Calvin Austin third, but Roman Wilson's probably going to have a lot of pressure on him to step up and play at a high level. And we'll honestly see how that ends up going. But not much. There's really no one that is a needle mover out there right now that you can add. Maybe at the deadline, if the Steelers are competitive in it, that is where we see somebody come in that's a legit two, that could move that needle. But right now, That guy is not out there, but that's free agency, trade market's dormant. So that guy is not out there. So we'll see what they can get out of this room. But that's kind of my synopsis of what they have right now. Again, don't expect it to be a very good room this year, but there are ways to have these guys that you have right now. They have strengths, they have speed, they have guys that can win deep. And if Van Jefferson has improved on his concentration and has better hands this year, I think that they have a guy that can be a legit three. I do think that. So I think that can give them at least a little bit of production. But I think largely it's going to be George Pickens and Pat Freiermuth doing a lot. And then I think you're going to have Najee Harris and Jalen Warren picking up a lot of the slack, being an extension of their run game, screens, et cetera, et cetera. So I think you're going to see a lot of that in order to try and make up for the wide receiver talent. All right, everybody, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, turn on the notification bell if you're watching this on YouTube. If you are listening to this on a podcasting platform, make sure to leave a review. We'll be back on Monday. It'll be Falcons week. Thanks for listening, everybody.